Karma here with your July Astrology cheat codes. If you are here, you recognize that we are astrologically influenced by the planets and stars. And with that understanding of how the energy influences us, we can better navigate life's obstacles. So welcome to the club, and let's take an overall look at what happens in July. All right, so in July, we have several planets going into retrograde. We have Neptune, Saturn going into retrograde in the realm of Aries and will retrograde back to Pisces. We have Mercury going into retrograde in the realm of Leo. We have Venus transitioning into both Cancer and Gemini. We have a Capricorn full moon, and we have a Leo new moon. And additionally, Uranus crosses into Gemini. So there's a lot happening in this month, especially with this retrograde energy, because many of these things are aspecting back to Neptune and Saturn. So there's an emphasis here on lessons, okay? And when Saturn hits retrograde, it can become like a pretty ugly energy. Saturn retrograde energy can sometimes be a little funky, okay? Because Saturn is the planet of karma. Saturn is also the planet of lessons, right? So as it goes into retrograde, it makes you retrospective of the lessons that you need to learn. And sometimes that can be kind of hard. That's a hard energy, okay? That's a hard energy to navigate. So, Saturn is going to be in retrograde for a minute. All right. So this is just the beginning, but it will cross back into Pisces, so it won't be as active in that Aries energy, but nonetheless, still lessons on lessons, okay? Lessons on lessons. All right, so I'm not going to go into deep analysis of each individual transit. I will give you the energy of the transit as it is transitioning into whatever is happening. However, I will create separate videos for all of the things that are happening in July so that we can get a more deep dive look at what it is everyone is supposed to be working on. But this will just be a summary of what's going on in July. So let's talk about the signs. If you are looking at this from the perspective of your rising sign, okay, this will be most accurate for your rising sign. This is because it encompasses your horizon of your life, okay? Your rising sign, your ascendant sign, the horizon of your life. This encompasses everything, okay? If you're looking at this from your sun perspective, your sun sign, this will be in relation to your ego, your attention, your focus, okay? If you are looking at this from your moon sign, this will be in relation to your emotions, your instincts, and your intuition. Okay, so with that, let's jump into the individual signs. Gemini. Okay, so July is going to be a heavy retrograde month. We have Neptune and Saturn going into retrograde in your 11th house. We have Mercury going into retrograde in your 3rd house. And then we have Uranus crossing into your 1st house of Gemini. Okay, so there's an emphasis here on yourself, but overall I'm going to say that, in every video, this really all plays a part in the shift that's happening in your 9th house, where Pluto is sitting in Aquarius, and this is your uniqueness, originality around how it is you discover or explore. Okay, overall, with these inner planets moving around, that's what we're working to attain with that outer energy, that very slow, long-lasting energy. Okay, so your 11th house is sextile to your 9th house where Pluto is sitting, and your 11th house is where Neptune and Saturn are sitting. Now, there are many aspects that are happening within this month. And as I said earlier in this video, in the intro, I will create separate videos for each one of these transits that are happening, so we can really deep dive into what's going on. But this will be an overall synopsis of what's happening in July for you, Gemini. Okay, so overall, again, we have retrograde in your 11th house. We have retrograde in your 3rd house for Mercury. We have Uranus crossing into your 1st house of Gemini. So there's a change in yourself. This all speaks to a change as it relates to how it is you express yourself, you know, how the world sees you and your thought process around that. These are your actions. These are how you show up, the mask that you put on for people, and just really like thinking about yourself from that perspective. So on July 4th, Venus enters Gemini within your first house. Venus represents love, beauty, abundance, attraction, relationships, harmony, peace, right? So this in your first house represents like the mask that you present within that realm of life, and you possibly, you know, changing your perspective on how it is, or you being limber on how it is you choose to show up, or, you know, lessons around what it is that you're doing. Okay, now while Venus enters into your first house of Gemini, it becomes sextile to your 11th house of Aries. This is where Neptune and Saturn are sitting. Okay, on the same day, July 4th, Neptune also goes into retrograde, which is what we'll talk about next. And Saturn is also going to pop into retrograde maybe like a week after that. So there's an emphasis here on this sextile energy for you to focus, right, on the flexibility of mind, or this could be changing your focus on what it is that you choose to create, or the harmony, or how it is that you show up in your relationships, love, beauty, abundance, right? What it is that you decide that you want to create, and how it is you express yourself in your overall community. This is with your friends, this is with your acquaintances, this is your community, social clubs, your community, right? So there's emphasis here on, you know, hopes, wishes, and dreams as well. There's emphasis here on you exploring creative opportunities, or it could be changing your focus, being flexible in your mind as it relates to, you know, how it is you show up in your community. There are going to be themes around that energy. And as I said before, on the same day, Neptune pops into retrograde. Retrograde is the 3 R's. It's reflection, restructure, repair, right? So retrograde turns energy inward, and it has you reflecting on the things of the past, or things that are kind of reside inside of you already, right? So this retrograde happens in your 11th house. So this is heavy emphasis on your community, your self-expression within this community, and the courage that you have, the assertiveness you have there. Okay, on July 7th, Uranus enters Gemini, which is your first house. Venus will also be there. Okay, so this is like your Venus has already passed Uranus, and there was a conjunction in your 12th house of Taurus. Okay, so this is a separating conjunction that's happening between Venus and Uranus. However, Uranus is now transitioning into your first house, and Uranus represents change. Okay, Uranus represents, you know, originality. It represents out with the old and in with the new. So there's an emphasis here, right, with Venus in that first house, Uranus in that first house, and that first house being sextile to your 11th house. Some sort of change as it relates to your focus, or this could be the mask that you present within your overall community. There are themes there around you learning lessons about that, because again, retrograde is about lessons, right? Retrograde is about restructure. There are things that are brought back to us, not to recuperate, but just to kind of observe and understand, you know, how the energy meshes in our life and in our perspective, so that we can learn more about ourselves. Okay. So again, with that first house sextile to that 11th house, this is about your community and how you present yourself in your community. So on July 10th, there is a full moon in Capricorn, okay? There would have been a new moon in Capricorn on January 11th. So if you can think back to what was happening around that time for you, Gemini, right? There's an emphasis here on discovery around that. This is like the new moon is, you know, there's not a whole lot of light at night. I like to think of this in a figurative way. It's not a whole lot at night because it's like a little sliver of a moon. So you can't really see too much. There would have been something there that was exposed that needed development, and now with this new moon, this this full moon happening here on July 10th, there is something here that is exposed to you around, you know, the development of a particular situation. And this is in your 8th house. So there is emphasis here on transitions. Your 8th house represents mystery. It represents transitions. It represents death. It represents regeneration. It's a trick bag house. It represents bonuses, wills, legacy, inheritance. It could be anything, really. Your spouse's money. It represents karma. So there is like your self-discipline within this area of life. It represents things that we need to leave behind as well. So with this full moon happening in your 8th house, there would have been something, because the new moon happened in your 1st house. So there's an emphasis here on like your focus and you discovering like maybe you need to move on from something, right? Again, this goes into the overall theme of what is happening right now, which is how you show up in your community, right? And the focus that you have, the mask that you wear within that community with this Capricorn full moon. There is going to be development around maybe something that you need to transition away from, something that you need to transition towards. This could be debts for you. This could be karma related as well, okay? On July 13th, Saturn goes into retrograde in that 11th house. Okay, so same house of community. The community, the community, the community. All right, so Saturn is our teacher. Saturn represents karma. Saturn represents effort and the results you get from that effort, right? It represents responsibility. It represents lessons, right? So again, retrograde, the 3 R's: reflection, restructure, repair, right? There's an emphasis here, you know, in that 11th house, we have some lessons that are coming along, right? And it's sextile again to that 9th house where Pluto is sitting, and that has been sextile forever. Neptune and Saturn, I don't know if I've been saying Uranus for Neptune. Saturn and Neptune, right, sit in that 11th house and they move slowly. So does Pluto. Pluto is the slowest moving one. So this sextile energy has lasted for a while. Nothing new, okay? However, again, with this retrograde energy, it brings in how we discover, how we develop. For some people, you could be moving on from a relationship. For some people, you could be moving on from a friendship, right? And this talks about like our discovery of ourselves, our change, our discovery of the world, a change in ideology for ourselves, right? As Pluto is entering into that 9th house, and as Saturn and Neptune are in that 11th house, okay? On July 18th, Mercury goes into retrograde, and that is going to be in the 3rd house of Leo, okay? So there's a lot of activity happening in this 3rd house of Leo. You got the sun entering Leo. A few days later, you will have a new moon in Leo as well that's very near that sun. So there's an emphasis here on Mercury going into retrograde of that 3rd house. Again, reflection, right? There is reflection around how it is, emphasis, how it is you show up, because these are all related. How it is you show up in your community, the mask that you wear or the things that you do, how your ego is triggered, the courage that you have within that energy, right? And maybe, you know, changing your mind to accept that it's okay to be different. Right? Like it's okay to not show up in the way that everyone expects you to and show up in the way that you want to, right? There's an emphasis here to this Gemini energy within that 1st house, your flexibility of mind. So the 3rd and the 1st house are now sextile, and Venus is in that 1st house. So there, again, there's an emphasis here around the things that you create based on ego and pride, the mask that you wear within your relationships. And again, the change of your perspective within that realm. And then you have Mercury in retrograde in your 3rd house, which is the house of mind, right? It's ruled by Gemini. The 3rd house is ruled by Gemini. Your 1st house is in the realm of Gemini. So there's heavy emphasis on a change in focus, okay? A change in how it is you process, how it is that you see yourself, or how it is that you see yourself in your broader sense of community. And it's overall changing like your worldview. Like, that's what's happening in this moment. A change of worldview, but on a deeper level, right? It's how you show up. Lessons that come back that adjust your perspective within that realm. So on July 22nd, the sun enters Leo. The sun is in Leo and it creates a sextile to that first house of Gemini. Okay, where Uranus has just crossed into. That is where Venus is sitting. So there's an emphasis here on, you know, your focus, right? The sextile energy creates opportunities. So within this third house of mind, again, heavy emphasis on your mind, heavy emphasis on your first house, your focus, your ego, what it is that, you know, how it is that you present yourself, heavy emphasis on your 11th house of your community. So again, the sun enters that third house of mind for you. And you know, it creates opportunities for you to think of how it is you are presenting yourself. There's just more energy around that same theme. Okay, and then we have that new moon in Leo that then crosses into the third house. Y'all seeing the theme here? Into that third house, and it'll be right by the sun, right in those first degrees, which creates sextile energy to that first house of self, again, in that mask you present, and it's trine energy to that 11th house of your community and how you express yourself amongst your community, right? So there are opportunities and easy flow of energy, but please remember that in this moment, right, in this third house, you have Mercury in retrograde. In this 11th house, you have Neptune and Saturn in retrograde as well. So this is heavy emphasis on opportunities coming back around and giving you the opportunity to reflect, restructure, repair. Okay, so, you know, I can't make no promises that everything is gonna feel the great, and you know, these energies are easy flowing energies for you to learn lessons. That's what's happening, because that 11th house is where them lessons are happening. Okay, and last but not least, we have Venus entering into Cancer. So Venus will make her way through that first house of Gemini, and at the end of July, Venus will enter Cancer, and it will become square to that 11th house. 11th house, 11th house, 11th house. We're gonna say 11th house over and over again. It becomes square to that 11th house, and so this is that Cancer energy and that Aries energy. Fire and air don't really mix. Okay, so there is difficult energy to navigate as it relates to your community, and as Venus enters Cancer, right, this is an emphasis on how it is your perceptiveness of what it is that you create and how that shows up in your community, right? This is square energy. So this is kind of like you're being alerted to, you know, one of the possible issues as to what's going on. And again, that 11th house is in retrograde. I'm just going to say that 11th house because the two planets that are there are in retrograde. So again, there's emphasis here around lessons, lessons, because Saturn is in retrograde. So overall, Gemini, again, the month of July brings you lessons around how it is you show up in your community, the mask that you present, or how you act within your ego or pride, or the focus you have within your community, and the impact of your mind, right? Your thought process. This could be like pointing out how, you know, you show up, right? And changing your mind or changing your perspective to what it is that you are doing and whether or not that works for your highest and greatest good. Okay, Gemini? I hope this reaches you well.